Are Pokemon designs getting worse with every new generation? Let's find out by analyzing every generation's design choices. I understand that art is very subjective, so take this as my own opinion. Let's go! First, I'm just gonna quickly explain what I think makes a good Pokemon design. We'll use Sharpedo and Garchomp as an example. Both are sharks with unique concepts, but one completely defines the Pokemon while one doesn't. Sharpedo is obviously meant to be a torpedo/shark, hence why it's only a head. Garchomp is a land shark while having influences from those old Spitfire planes and their paintings of a shark, hence the interesting color choices. Why I think Garchomp is so loved is because his concept as a Spitfire plane shark doesn't come at the cost of a cohesive anatomy. It doesn't have the body of a plane, rather shark-like features such as a hammerhead and normal shark-like fins, with legs and arms because it's a land shark, not a plane shark. Contrast this to Sharpedo, which is basically a shark head shaped torpedo. I guarantee you if they had used the same face but gave Sharpedo an actual shark body, it would have complemented the design much better. Our eyes are naturally drawn to things we can easily recognize. That's why I think a good Pokemon design is something like Garchomp's, where its concept isn't the priority over its general anatomy of the animal or thing it's trying to portray. With that in mind, let's look at more Pokemon designs across the generations. Personally, I always group generations 1 to 4 together for a number of reasons, mainly because they were all based off of areas in Japan, which meant overall a similar art style. Although Gens 1 and 2, generally speaking, had more round designs, while Generations 3 and 4 started to have sharper and more complicated design choices, but it was never enough to completely be unrecognizable from the previous generations. If you pick any Pokemon from these 4 gens, generally speaking, it's hard to tell what gen they're from purely from the art style alone. These similarities are further seen within the small features of the Pokemon's designs. Overall, these Pokemon have less humanoid features, as well as more sharper, natural-looking eyes. I think that's the reason why Dragonite isn't anywhere near as loved as Charizard. It's because Charizard's eyes are more sharper, which conveys more aggression, accompanied with its more rigid and dragony design. Compare this to Dragonite's anime girl eyes and rounded head and body features. This flaw in Dragonite's design becomes more apparent when being compared to other pseudo-legendary favorites. The only real stark differences when comparing these 4 generations are the legendary designs, which became more aggressive looking and complicated with the arrivals of Generation 3 and 4. Also, generally speaking, none of the Pokemon break the boundaries of the art style. The only time it's very blatant is for a special Pokemon like Mewtwo, or with fighting types like the Machop line, which are usually the exception to having humanoid features. Lastly, I personally feel like these 4 generation starter lineups are by far the best designed overall. All design concepts aren't too outlandish and fit appropriately with the animal and typing they are trying to portray. Now, I just quickly want to say, obviously not every Pokemon in these generations are good. Some obvious ones are Pokemon like Voltorb, Tangela, Jynx, and Magneton. I think the one thing all of these Pokemon have in common are the fact that their overall concept is too artificial and foreign for animals or even monsters to be portraying. What I mean by this is some inventions like plane flaps were inspired off of bird wings and turbines by I think whale fins. Although this isn't always the case, it is easy to see animal influences and inspirations in man-made designs. But when it's an object with zero connection that's manufactured or humanoid, like a ball, magnet, type of fashion or trend, then it's much harder to make a connection. This isn't always the case for people disliking designs, but it can be a big factor. Keep this in mind for later on. Generation 5 was the first game that's region wasn't based in Japan. Rather, it was based off of Manhattan and the surrounding islands in New York. This meant a completely different feeling for the games and art. I think when Generation 5 first came out, it received a lot of hate for the Pokemon designs, as many said that they're basically worse versions of Pokemon already made in the older 4 generations. Although that's mostly true, I think a lot of people have grown to appreciate these games much more since then. This generation added a lot of dragon types, and honestly, I think it's one of the best lineup ever. Mostly every design had the more sharper, dinosaur-y body look accompanied with the appropriate eyes to convey the sense of power and intimidation dragon types usually exude. This can also be said for many other really well-designed Pokemon like Galvantula and Electros that have a lot of the original animal's personality while still being unique, especially when comparing it to previous generations' attempts of the same animal, which I think Generation 5 in this case performed better. With that being said, much of this generation overstretched the humanoid aspect of some Pokemon, which in my opinion is never a good thing, especially when they look this ugly. This goes for the Genie legendaries as well. There's a point where something stops looking like a Pokemon and just a guy sitting naked in a cloud with whatever this is, as well as just awkward designs that easily stand out. Like friggin' Beartic has a hangover stain of ice and its head is a weirdly sharp point, and no, this does not translate well on drawing or in-game. Overall, this generation's designs can be really good, but if you get rid of half of the 156 added, I wouldn't really care too much, as I think this generation is where they first started to focus on concepts that were just too foreign for Pokemon to be made out of, like a literal ice cream cone or trash bag. Although this wasn't the majority, it definitely was increasing compared to previous gens. Generation 6 saw a further increase to these foreign concepts, as well as its priority as the defining design choice over more conventional animal anatomy. This theme would follow throughout for the rest of the generations to come, as seen with the final evos of the starters and the legendaries. Although Greninja is great, I can't say the same for the rest of them. I think that's also why people were more drawn to Zygarde's original design, as yes, it was the Z Pokemon, but it wasn't the defining factor in its design. It had such a unique color scheme and scales that wasn't seen before. While Yveltal is literally a Y and Xerneas being an X when it needs to be. Although the Pokemon introduced in this generation weren't bad, some have actually kind of grown on me as well. But many of them did feel a little bit awkward, whether with the eye choices or just ugly designs, or as mentioned before with the concepts being too direct or foreign for a Pokemon. I decided to group the next two gens together as I think they both amplify the problems mentioned earlier. Again, both Gen 7 and 8 focus on strange concepts for Pokemon and their respective typings to have, which ruin many potentially great designs in my opinion. This is most obviously seen in the starters, like a James Bond chameleon, a Rockstar drumming monkey, and a Royal Rumble wrestling cat. It's just awkward, especially when comparing them to previous generations' designs that were more grounded in nature. There's a reason why people like Seviper and Arbok much better than Sandaconda. It's because they decently resemble what a snake monster would look like, as well as appropriately convey their respective typing being poison. They can still coil and do everything a normal snake can do, but Sandaconda is stuck forever looking like this. It's defined by its concept of being a slinky snake thing in a jar. Our eyes are more naturally drawn to familiarity. That's why a Pokemon like Superior would have probably been more favored if they had a more conventional snake-like head like the other Pokemon mentioned earlier instead of a snout. There are just too many examples of this within Generation 7 and 8. Again, comparing two Pokemon, Dragapult and Nadal? Sure, Dragapult has slots on its head to shoot things out, but it still looks like a dragon and has a tail that goes invisible to help give it that ghost type transparency. Nadal is just a literal needle with a dragon top half. Lastly, color choices just generally being more saturated like some kid colored them in. They used to have a much more subtle color scheme that didn't pop out as obviously, but now it can be all over the place. So what happens when you take all the bad, awkward design choices shown, mix it all together, and what do you get? These monstrosities, Dialga and Palkia's origin forms. Thank God Giratina's origin form was done 10 plus years ago, because these guys completely missed the park. Just by looking at the official art of regular Dialga and Palkia from 2006, comparing them to their origin forms in 2022, you can tell that they had no idea what they were doing. Giratina's origin form also made sense. It didn't need legs as it uses its origin form in the Distortion world, which is its gravity is manipulated and controlled by Giratina. These guys didn't need an origin form. Plus, why do they now have horse legs, or whatever these are, instead of arms and their normal legs? It's like the design philosophy was to make them resemble Arceus, even though that was never in their original concepts as dragons, water, and steel types respectively. Now, I haven't even mentioned the Gigamax or Mega forms of Pokemon, but I'm sure you can probably guess what I think of them by now. So this brings us to the latest generation, Gen 9. Although it's too early to make any final judgments, but just by looking at the starters and comparing them to the older ones, sadly it doesn't seem like they're veering off their design philosophies from the recent previous generations. I mean, at least the legendaries look kinda cool, except for this tire looking thing and wait, is that jet engines on his legs? What did I just say? Do you agree with what I said? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy some of our other ones, so don't forget to check out other Pokemon related content and just general game discussions. This has been the Hero of Sinnoh. Thanks for watching.